Now we get to play with the delicious and delightful roving. It's such a gorgeous thing to touch. And the roving is what gives us these beautiful little textural cloud elements. So we're going to do a couple of rows, then we're going to do a little a section of plain weave before we get to the next bank of luscious clouds. And it's super, super easy to work with. So we've got quite a thick piece here, so all we really need to work with is 1/4 to 1/3. So I'm going to start by splitting this in half. I'm just going to set half aside, and then I'm splitting this in half. Again, it splits very easily, and I've got a thinner piece to work with because we're not working with a massive loom. We don't want our clouds to be like so intensely large that they overpower the whole design. And we're just plain weaving these using our fingers. So I'll just scoop this little fringe back. So I'm just starting one side, it doesn't really matter which side, and I'm just gently pulling through, under and over every second. Warp thread until I've got a bit sticking out one end and then kind of the length sticking out the other, and then I'm going to start to pull those clouds through. And you might want to have a little play with them to kind of get them to the size that you'd like. A little bit of fluff stuck to that one, and I'm pushing down. So we've got a little kind of bit hanging out here, and we've got a bit more hanging out here, and we're going to kind of feed both those back on top. It does look better when you have at least 2 rows of the clouds. One row is kind of cute, but it does squash down quite a bit, so you do want another row to sort of enhance that luscious cloudiness. So I'm just wrapping around and sort of loosely feeding that in. That's kind of created another cloud. I'm just going to tuck that bit behind. Then I'm bringing this one back over to create another row. And I'm not pulling right in because we want to kind of take advantage of that nice little natural mound, oh Christ, what would you call it? Cloud on the end there. Just pull through, make sure that those clouds are coming through. So we've managed to get a couple more clouds there, and I'm going to continue doing that with this other 1/4 thickness of roving, just until we've got a couple of rows or a few rows even of these nice little cloudy effects. So we've completed our bank of clouds, and what we're going to be doing now is 5 rows of taupe and 5 rows of cream. But we're not doing a single thickness like we did for the header and to lock in the fringe, these little rows here. We're actually going to do a thickness of 3. So we're going to weave the yarn a little bit chunkier. So like we always do, to pre-dispense the yarn, we're going to just measure across. So we're doing 5 rows. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a little bit more for good measure. Then, in a similar way to the folding action that we did for the wry knots, I'm folding the yarn over to double it, and then I want to fold it over again. So I've got a thickness of 3. And then we're going to pretend that that's just one bit of yarn. I'm going to thread the needle. Here it is over here. So we're just treating this triple thickness of yarn as one piece and just weaving it as one. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're just going over and under. And we're still going to, this is quite loose, so I haven't really used the arch technique because it hasn't really grabbed onto any of the yarn, any of these warp threads. It's quite loose the way I'm weaving it. and I've tucked in, so that's the first row of 5. I will need my comb to help me here. Second row. Third row. Fourth row. It's in there. The clouds are just kind of covering it. And then row number 5. And just a little bit to tuck in there. So you can see, even though it's a triple thickness, it hasn't taken up a lot of room on the loom. And if we just go back to our original little baby, so it's just that little section there that we've done. Now we're going to do the white or the cream, and then we'll do some more clouds, but before that we'll put this nice little tuft in. So I've dispensed my 5 rows of cream by measuring 5 across the loom to get the right amount, and then I've tripled it in thickness like we did for the taupe. Then I've threaded all that through as if it was one, through the large hole in the needle, and I'm going to weave another 5 rows on top of the taupe. So feel free to pause if you want to catch up to that point, and I'll just be happily weaving. Even when you pause, I'm weaving. It's like magic. This little baby alpaca yarn is so delightful and soft. So I'm on my 3rd row. This is my 5th. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep. I really over measured that one. I'm just going to tuck that back in. Let's poke all that behind. As always, please feel free to pause if you need to catch up. And there we have our 5 rows of taupe, which are kind of sinking into the clouds, but that's fine. Our 5 rows of cream, and now we're going to add that little textural element to the side, which is this nice little kind of fuzzy wuzzy pom-pommy bit here, using this variegated yarn. So the fabulous thing about the Rya knot is that you can make it long or short, you can make it loopy or straight, and we're going to make some short little Rya knots to place into our work to create a nice little fluffy effect. And instead of using the 20 centimeter template, I'm just going to use my fingers, and I'm going to wrap the yarn around 3 of my fingers. I'm going to do it 10 times. And you're going to do it 10 times too. Thanks. So I'm just going to chop those off my fingers, but I'm not going to chop my fingers. So just keep that in mind. Pop the excess to one side. And then you can see we've got these nice little short lengths of the variegated yarn here, which we're going to pop a few layers into the wall hanging, and that's going to create a nice little textural pom-pom effect. So we're going to start from the right hand side, and we're going to skip the first 2 warp threads, and we're going to the next 2 across. So we're using exactly the same principle as we did for the fringe, but it's just a shorter version. So I'm isolating those 2 warp threads, and then I'm pulling each side of the mini bundle through. So that's my little mini bundle, and I'm pulling down. Then we're going to go to the next 2 across. Voila. Place over the top. Did I mention we're doing 2 at a time? I apologize if I did not. So we're doing 2 at a time. Pull down, grab 2 more, get a thick one and a thin one, 2 thicks, 2 thins, it doesn't really matter. So I've got 3 happening here next to each other, pulling down. Cool. And they're quite long, but what we can do later on is just trim them. So we can just kind of grab them, and a bit like, you know, trimming a fringe or something like that. For the next one, we're going to skip the first thread and go in between, like we would if we were doing a second row on our fringe. We're just going in between there. Then we're going to the next 2 across, which will also be in between those 2 ones that we just completed. Grab 2. Pull down, and then for the last one we're going in the middle here. So we've essentially almost created like a little triangle, although it won't look like a triangle, but that's sort of the principle that we've followed. So just grab these 2, voila, voila. Now you can see it's kind of pulled down a little bit, but that doesn't really matter. We can sort of push each side of the cream down to even it out, but essentially we're going to be sort of filling in these gaps either side of the bundle with more roving. That's what's going to give us that second bank of clouds, and then we won't see a lot of this going on here, but there will sort of be a hint of it, and it will help us to even things back up. So time to grab our roving, the remainder of our roving. So this is half of the original piece, and once again we're going to split that into 2 and work with the quarters. And what we're going to be doing is kind of weaving all the way across and pulling the clouds out in these sections, but just kind of looping it smoothly over the top and not pulling clouds out here for the first row. And then we can start kind of pulling clouds out as we get onto the second row, because we want to just take advantage of that first row and sort of just filling in the gaps on the side, but not enhancing or lifting up that that mound any higher. So I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to pull this all the way across using my fingers and being quite gentle, because it's not a an overly tough material, this one. So I've got a little tail hanging out here, which I'll use to create some clouds. And then I've got my section here, which I'll use to create some clouds as well. So I'm just going to pull the cloud out here and then fold this around to create another cloud. So we've got some tufts sticking out. I'm just going to push that down on top and then start creating a cloud from this point. Then we're coming back the other way, creating another little cloud on the side there. Just pulling these clouds through as we go. And then we've got our last piece that we can use to just sort of create a little bit more action on top. So I'll let you go ahead and do that, and we'll be back in a minute. Okay, so I've completed all of my little cloudy rows, and then I've pushed it down quite a bit just to make sure there's a bit of structural integrity. We don't want the whole thing to be too loose. So you can see now we've got that little gap between the two cloud banks, and we just want to now trim our little tufts. And I'm literally just doing that by placing my fingers all the way around, just so I've got the ends peeking out like so. And I'm just going to do a little trim. I'm going to be careful, I'm not going to cut myself. And I think that'll do for the moment. We might just want to hold off giving it a totally aggressive trim until it's actually kind of off the loom and we've got a good feel for how it's looking. But you know, that's what mine's looking like so far. Definitely went a bit longer than I should have with those, so I can make a decision if I want to trim once I take it off the loom. But sometimes you take something off the loom and it looks really good, you know, it just works really well. So it's very good to kind of make little trimming decisions once you've got something hanging on the wall, and not make decisions about your work when you're sort of looking down on it, because that's not actually how it's going to be viewed once it's off the loom. So the next phase is to do 20 rows of the taupe, and that's 20 rows in a single. So we did sort of a triple thickness before, but now we're just doing a bank of plain, and that's really going to help enhance the textural element. So you get this nice sort of mixture in the work, and that, in my humble opinion, elevates it. So I would not suggest that you dispense 20 rows of yarn. If you're feeling confident, you can do 10 rows at a time, but if you are not feeling overly confident with, you know, you're worried that you're going to tangle things, then do 5 rows at a time. So just do that, you know, 5 rows, tuck it in, do another 5 rows. I'm going to do 10 rows at a time because I'm feeling confident. I've just finished my 20 rows of plain weave in the taupe on top of my clouds. The next step is 7 rows of the variegated yarn. So that's 7 rows of this one. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. A little bit more for good measure, like always. And I'd say by this stage you should have your plain weave down pat and know all the steps, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and do my seven rows, and then once again come back. So you may choose to pause at this point as well. I'll just be tucking tucking that one in. Now you've noticed that my little heddle has flipped down. So for me at this point, when I sort of start to get towards the top of the loom, I don't find I need it anymore. But some people still keep it in. It's totally personal preference. So it's whether or not it's a help or a hindrance at this point, I suppose. Also, by the time you kind of get up here, the warp threads have loosened a bit, so they're easier to get under. So for me, I'm going to pop it out, but it's entirely your choice. I've done my 7 rows, and you can see because it's a yarn that's like thick in some parts and thin in others, that it's kind of come out a little bit uneven, but that is easily fixed because it's quite a malleable yarn. So we can just kind of use our comb to even it up and push it down. One thing that I will mention, oops, that little one popped out there, is that you do need to make sure you are kind of effectively pushing down your work as you go along. So we can see that I've kind of created a nice straight edge there, and I can kind of even use that to push that back up to make it a bit more even. So we've got 20 rows of the taupe, 7 rows of the variegated yarn, and now we've got 5 rows of the cream at the top, which will just kind of nicely lock everything in. And then after that, we're ready to take our work off the loom, which is very exciting. So yep, just the last step is to measure 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can even do 3 if you want to. Between 3 and 5 at this stage, it doesn't really matter. Just going to thread and all right, so we have got our 20 rows, our 7 rows, and our 3 to 5 rows, whatever your personal preference is. I've done 5. And basically, that is the body of our work completed. So I'm just going to use the comb to really kind of push and lock everything in and make sure that that edge is nice and even. The softness of my fingers kind of helps to create that nice even edge as well. So let's just kind of pull it back and have a look at the whole thing without my unsightly microphone cord getting in the way. So I'm really looking forward to pulling that off the loom and seeing how it works on the wall. And the one thing that we have to do before we take it off the loom is to add that little extra flourish, which is the pom-pom. Once again, like the little tie, the little bow down here, and also I suppose to a certain degree the level that we want to trim or even not trim these rye knots. These are kind of personal touches or decisions that you can make on your own if you want to add these touches or not. And the pom-pom, which I'll just show you in our completed work, is just off to one side, and it just kind of, you know, replicates the nice sort of fuzziness here, and the sort of the prettiness of the work, I suppose. And a pom-pom is a very simple thing to make. So people have contraptions and all sorts of bits and pieces to make a pom-pom, but I think the best thing to use is our hand. So in the taupe, once again around 3 fingers, we are wrapping at least 50 times. So I'm probably up to about 25. You can even go like up to 70 if you really want a full luscious pom-pom. However, because our pom-pom is actually going to be sort of sitting flat against our work, it actually is a benefit if the pom-pom is a bit flat at the back. So we're actually not making a technically completely round pom-pom. So we don't have to go as thick around our hand as if we were making like a full-on pom-pom. I think that's enough. So between 50 and 70 for you guys. I'm just easing that whole bundle off my hand now. So I'm just going to move this out of the way so we've got room. You can see what I'm doing. So I've just eased that whole little bundle off my hand. And now I'm getting a long piece, maybe about 60 centimeters, that I'm going to use to tie around the center of that bundle. So I've popped it over the top, I flipped it over, and I'm going to tie a double knot. The key to a good pom-pom is tying it as tight as you possibly can at this point, and then giving it a really good haircut. So you may even need somebody to assist you if you want to make sure you're getting it as tight as possible around the center. So I'm pretty satisfied with that. So I'm just making sure that I'm not accidentally trimming these long bits, because we'll be using those to tie onto the wall hanging. So I'm just kind of, I've popped it through my hand like that, and I've got these out of the way so my scissors don't accidentally grab them. And now I'm going through and I'm cutting all of these loops. You can see it's starting to splay open. Good pom-pom. There's a couple of loops in the middle here which I've missed. Okay, I was looking for any other little loopy bits I've missed. All right, so I'm just going to give it a little shake. And you can see it looks a bit like a dog's breakfast, which is why you need to give it a really good haircut. Here's that kind of flat business I was talking about at the back. So, and that's sort of where it will sit against the wall hanging. So we'll have a kind of a nice little round bit here, but it'll be sort of flat at the back. And then we just start to give it a little haircut. So we create that nice rounded shape, etc., etc. I'm seriously not going to make you sit here and watch me trim a bloody pom-pom. That's like crazy boring. So I'll be back with a nicely trimmed baby. It's so adorable. Okay, so I've given it a really good haircut, and you can see all this little pom-pom snow that I didn't sort of hold back. So that's one of the things that you know, you can keep in mind, is that you can't over trim your pom-pom, and then, you know, this happens. It's like, oh yeah, I can see an extra little bit. Anyway, that's perfectly adequate, and I'm going to get rid of all of this pom-pom dust and grab our wall hanging. So we are placing it around the 4th warp thread in from the left hand side. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So I've got these nice long bits to work with, and I'm just going to wrap one underneath and then pull it through until the pom-pom is sitting up against the top of the work. So you can see here, it's kind of, can you see? It's kind of a bit tricky to see actually. So that's the 2 bits of string there. And I'm going to tie a double knot. So that's my first knot, and I'm just making sure it's down against the top, sitting against the top row. And then I'm going to do another knot. Just sort of slide it under. Cool. And then I'm just going to trim those 2 bits. Bye. And we are now ready to take this off the loom. It's so exciting. Okay, are you ready? So what we're going to do is we're going to cut it off, which sounds and feels alarming, but what happens is once we cut through these threads, they don't pop out of these little notches. They stay like very good little boys and girls in these notches. And I'll show you what I mean. So I'll try and angle this so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to be chopping through the threads around the center of the loom. Maybe it's a little bit below, but around the center is fine. And I'm just slicey. voila. And like I promised, everything's still sitting in there, so nothing's kind of sprung off. So no anxiety attacks, please. Okay, so I'm going to scoop these out of the way, but normally you would do this like flat on the table in front of you, but for the sake of this demonstration, I'm doing it upside down and back to front. So I'm pulling out these first 2 warp threads, and I'm going to tie them in a double knot underneath the loom, and I just kind of tie until I feel a bit of resistance. So that's the first one secured. Now I'm going to the next 2 along. I'm easing them out and tying a double knot underneath the loom. Now I am going to flip it around and do this the proper way, so you can see me doing it this way. Oh, the flare. Is that good? Can you kind of see what I'm doing? So I'm going to the next 2 across. I'm pulling them out, tying a double knot. I'm not tying on top of the loom, I'm tying under the loom. Of course, you may want to pause. And these are the last 2 here, which naughtily slipped out, but that's okay. Okay, so the bottom is all tied off, it's all secured. So now I can just slip the top out. So this is what it looks like at the back, at the bottom, so everything's tied off together. I'm just going to lay that down, and I'm making sure all of the warp threads are facing towards me like that. I've got this long bit here, which was that diagonal tied off bit at the back, so I'm just going to trim it to get it out of the way. And I'm getting the first 2 warp threads, and once again I'm tying in a double knot. And I'm not tying it tight, I'm not tying it hard, so I'm tying like a tightish knot, but I don't want it to really kind of pull and buckle the work. I'm really just, so next to across, I'm really just sort of tying until I'm hitting that top row. And I want to make sure I'm maintaining that nice straight edge as much as possible as well. And it shouldn't be too awkward when you come to tie it behind the pom-pom. So once again, I've done a million of these, so I'm pretty quick at it. So feel free to pause. I certainly do not expect you to be doing it as fast as I am. Okay. So everything is tied together and secure now. And there we have it. So yours should look similar, but it will have your own special little touch in it. And that's what I love about weaving, is even when people have the same materials, the same techniques, the same instructions, your hand is in this work, and there are little elements and little actions that your fingers make, little mini decisions that your brain makes, which makes it uniquely your work. So we're going to add a stick to this. Okay, so I've got a bamboo stick here. This is my little design. You can use a bit of dowel, or you can use a nature stick, a bit of driftwood, anything that you like. You don't even have to add a stick if you don't want to, but I personally like the aesthetic of finishing off a piece with a stick. So you can see all these sort of, tied off bundles here. That's 2 threads tied together, 2 threads tied together. I'm going to feed the stick through each of those tied off works. Just try and angle it so you can kind of see nicely what I'm doing. So I've just slipped it through the kind of front and back warp thread. And then I'm going to lay it down once again, and I'm tying that stick on with a double knot. So in the same way that we did a double knot to finish off the top of our work, we're doing a double knot on top of the stick. Make sure you do tie that knot actually on top of the stick, because it will help those warp threads to kind of sit nicely in an upward manner when we finish it off by tying that into a fringe, which I'll show you what I'm talking about in a minute. And when I tie the stick on, I always start with tying at one end, and then I go immediately to the other end and tie the other end on, and that just sort of assists in making sure everything is tied on evenly. So I've done that end there, that end there, and that end there, and now I'm going to go through and tie off all the ones in the middle. Exhilarating viewing, I know. Okay, voila, and we are just moments away from absolutely completing this wall hanging. So I've got everything tied off on top, just got these warp threads gathered up like so, and now I'm going to tie a bit of yarn around the top of these warp threads to create that little fan effect. This is what I mean. So this is in the completed work. So I've just kind of gathered them all in and tied a little bow around the top there. So I'm going to get a little bit of my white or cream yarn. I'm scooping it under all those gathered warp threads, and I'm tying bow quite tightly because we don't want any of them to slip out, like so, and voila, we have a wall hanging, peeps. So we've got one piece of adorableness in our hand. So thank you for hanging in there. I would like to say follow, share, comment. I'm particularly interested in any feedback. If there was any element that you weren't able to follow, I want to make these tutorials as accessible as possible. I really love weaving and I want to share weaving with people like you. I'll be posting other techniques that you can refer to, and also other weaving techniques, and also I'll be sharing different art practices that I use in my studio. So yeah, follow, share, bell, etc., you know, all the usual things. Thanks so much. Bye.